If you think humiliation can break a woman, then you've never seen what happens when silence turns into strength. I was 6 months pregnant when my husband tried to erase me in front of 300 people, and if you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll understand why that night was not the end of my marriage, but the beginning of my freedom. So before we go further, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because stories like this deserve to be heard by every woman who has ever been underestimated. My name is Ariana Bennett, though for 3 years I had introduced myself as Ariana Cole, the supportive wife of rising corporate star Mason Cole. What no one at that glittering winter gala knew was that Bennett was not just a last name. What's legacy? My father, Richard Bennett, built Bennett International from a single shipping warehouse into a multinational powerhouse with investments in technology, real estate, and energy across 5 continents. I grew up in boardrooms and charity galas, but I also grew up watching opportunists circle wealth like sharks scenting blood. That's why I promised myself that when I married, it would be for love, not status. When I met Mason at a leadership conference 3 years ago, he seemed different. He didn't recognize my name because I never used it publicly. I told him my mother's maiden name instead. I dressed simply, avoided press, and never mentioned my family. Mason was magnetic, ambitious, intelligent, full of plans about how he would one day sit at the head of a global firm. I admired his drive. I believed in his vision. When we married in a small private ceremony, I felt certain I had found a man who loved me for who I was, not for the empire behind me. After the wedding, Mason joined Bennett International through a competitive hiring process, never knowing the CEO was my father. I wanted him to succeed on merit, and he did. He worked late nights, impressed senior partners, climbed faster than anyone expected. I cheered from the sidelines, proud and quietly protective of my secret. But success changed him in ways I hadn't anticipated. The higher he climbed, the more image mattered. The more image mattered, the less I seemed to fit. When I became pregnant, instead of joy, I saw irritation flicker across his face. He spoke about timing, about optics, about how executives' wives needed to look polished, effortless, slim. My body was changing, and so was his tone. He began coming home later, guarding his phone, stepping into other rooms to take calls. I knew before I found proof. A woman always knows when love shifts into something colder. 2 months later, I discovered messages between him and his marketing director. Vanessa read hotel reservations, private jokes, complaints about dead weight at home. I read every word without crying. I didn't confront him. I waited. I wanted to see how far he would go if he believed I was powerless. The company's annual Winter Excellence Gala was the perfect stage. It was Mason's first year being publicly recognized as a senior executive. Investors, media, industry leaders would attend. I told him I would come. He hesitated, suggesting I might be too tired in my condition. I insisted gently. That night, I chose a simple navy maternity gown, minimal jewelry, soft makeup. I looked like myself, not like the ornamental wife executives often paraded. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and crystal centerpieces. Cameras flashed. Mason stood near the stage, laughing too loudly beside Vanessa, who wore a silver dress and confidence sharpened like a blade. When I approached, her smile tightened. She looked me up and down, lingering on my stomach. "Oh," she said loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "I didn't realize spouses were allowed to dress so casual." A few executives chuckled. Mason gave me a thin smile, the kind reserved for awkward inconveniences. During the gift exchange portion of the evening, names were drawn for playful onstage presentations. My name was called. I felt dozens of eyes follow me as I walked carefully to the stage. Vanessa joined me, holding a large wrapped box. When I opened it, inside were cleaning supplies, rubber gloves, a bottle of polish, and finally a mop, which she dramatically placed in my hands. "Since you seem more suited to domestic duties," she announced, "we thought you'd feel right at home." Laughter rippled through the ballroom, hesitant at first, then louder when Mason didn't object. In fact, he laughed too. Not nervously, windily. He leaned toward another executive and whispered something that made them both grin. I stood there, pregnant, holding a mop under the spotlight, feeling the baby shift inside me, as if even she sensed the betrayal. What broke me wasn't the insult. It was the realization that my husband was ashamed of me. He stepped onto the stage, took the microphone, and said, "All right, that's enough. Ariana, why don't you head home and rest?" Rest. As if exhaustion was the problem, not humiliation. Something inside me went quiet then, not shattered clear. I placed the mop gently on the stage floor. At that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened. The room shifted before anyone even turned. My father entered with the calm authority of a man who never needed to raise his voice. Beside him walked two members of the board and the company's legal counsel. Conversations died mid-sentence. Mason's face drained of color as recognition dawned. My father approached me first, ignoring everyone else, and wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "Are you all right, Ari?" he asked softly. I nodded. Then he turned to the room. "Would someone like to explain why my daughter was handed a mop on this stage?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Mason stared at me, then at my father, confusion morphing into horror. "Daughter," he whispered. My father gestured subtly, and the giant screens behind the stage flickered to life. Footage filled the walls, security recordings from executive offices, hotel lobbies, private lounges. Emails appeared. Audio clips played. Vanessa's voice mocking my pregnancy. Mason complaining that he had married beneath his ambition. Gasps spread like wildfire. My father had known for months. He had investigated quietly after noticing financial discrepancies and policy violations tied to Mason's department. Tonight was not coincidence, it was accountability. "Integrity," my father said evenly, "is the foundation of this company. Anyone who humiliates a member of my family while violating corporate ethics has no place here." Security approached Vanessa first. She protested, face flushed, but her badge was confiscated. Mason tried to speak, tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. The board announced immediate termination pending legal review for misuse of company funds. Police officers waiting discreetly near the entrance moved forward to address the financial charges already documented. Mason looked at me then, not with love, not even with anger, but with fear. "You lied to me," he said hoarsely. I met his gaze steadily. "No," I replied. "I just didn't advertise my last name." I handed him an envelope I had kept in my purse all evening. Divorce papers. He stared at them as if they were written in a foreign language. "You can't do this," he muttered. "Watch me," I answered quietly. I didn't scream. I didn't insult him. I simply walked off that stage beside my father, my dignity intact. The media tried to spin the story the next morning, but the evidence was undeniable. Mason's career unraveled within hours. Vanessa's professional reputation collapsed. Several executives who had laughed that night were suspended for failing to intervene in what was deemed workplace harassment. 6 months later, I sit in a sunlit nursery holding my daughter, Alara, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine. The mansion I grew up in no longer feels like a gilded cage. It feels like sanctuary. I kept my maiden name again not because of pride, but because I refused to shrink for someone else's comfort. Mason attempted apologies, long messages about pressure and ambition and insecurity, but some fractures cannot be polished smooth. I didn't need revenge. Consequences handled that. What I needed was peace. And peace came the moment I realized humiliation is only powerful if you accept it as truth. They tried to reduce me to a punchline, a prop, a background character in a story about male success. Instead, that night revealed exactly who everyone was when they thought power was on their side. If you've ever been underestimated, mocked, or told to shrink yourself to fit someone else's narrative, let my story remind you that silence can be strategy, and dignity can be louder than rage. I walked into that ballroom as a wife, trying to save a marriage, and I walked out as a woman who saved herself. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that your worth is not determined by someone else's applause or cruelty, then subscribe to this channel and stay with us for more stories of strength, justice, and quiet resilience. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's walking away unbroken.